Welcome to Porsches and Prophecy with me, Carl Lawley. Please join us every week as we transform my dusty old Porsche restoration shop into a fun Bible prophecy study where we discuss the prophetic timeline and the crazy current events we're all witnessing around the world. Enjoy. On Sunday, Tammy and I went to the early service at church. She was supposed to watch kids at that service, but they didn't have any, so she got to come into the sanctuary with me, and so we got to enjoy the early service for a change. And so what happened was we're sitting there, and Pastor Pete was talking about Joseph, and he was reading from Genesis 40 and 41. So he was at the place where Joseph was in prison, and they had the baker and the butler, and then after that, remember the butler who lived forgot about Joseph, and then so he's talking about that, and he's making points and whatever, and then he gets to Genesis 41, and the very first verse of Genesis 41 is about Pharaoh having a dream. But it starts off by saying that it says, at the end of 2 years, And Pete stopped right there after he read it. He said, it's interesting. Wonder why God decided to tell us that it was 2 years. And of course, my little prophecy, timeline tingle went off, and my little antennas went up, and I'm like, I know why, because there's a timeline hidden in there, right? And so, of course, I made it my my business to start studying that, and man, did that come to life. That was as good as the Hannah one, or the Anna one in Luke chapter 2. And so anyway, it was pretty amazing. And so I wrote like 3 pages about it, and just all these interconnections were popping up. And so this morning I came in really early, and I actually drew out the timeline that you see on the screen up there. The problem is there's so much going on that I didn't really have room for all this stuff. So I got arrows everywhere, right? So it was a little bit hard to kind of map out, but I did the best I could. But basically, there are several different things hidden in Genesis 40 and 41. Number one, I realized that the baker and the butler, they are sort of a foreshadowing of the 2 thieves on the cross. Now, we don't know why they were in prison, because they were high up in Pharaoh's court, basically. One was the baker, I guess, the head chief. They were chiefs, basically. So we don't know, did they steal something? I have no idea. But anyway, one of them, they both have dreams the same time. So there's 2 dreams, one per, and Joseph interpreted those dreams for them. And so one of them, basically he gets to live and be restored as the butler, and the baker, unfortunately, his dream meant that he was going to die within 3 days. And so there's another, you got another timeline going on there. And so start thinking, wow, you know what? That sounds an awful lot like the 2 thieves on the cross with Jesus. Because as we know, we've talked about a few times actually, that Joseph is sort of like, he's a Messiah figure. Okay, he was 30 years old when he became ruler. He lived and he ruled for 80 years. And of course, we know what the 80 means on the timeline for Israel. And there are just a host of different things that happened in Joseph's life that were very similar to Jesus. Like the fact that he was betrayed by his brothers, for instance, right? And Jesus was betrayed by his brothers. I have this whole long list, but I didn't bring that tonight. His brothers being the Israelites, right? And anyway, so I kind of got lost in there because I'd really love to have that list right now, but I don't have it. In the book I have 17 different things, and now I know there are more, right? So we've got the thieves on the cross. One lives, one dies, and he is restored back to service. And so, hang on a second. I have to put my glasses on because I can't read a darn thing. So yeah, when Pete said, then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Like, yeah, there's definitely a timeline in. There's no doubt about that. I'll edit this part out because I'm just looking like an idiot right now. So I got to trim all this stuff down too. Anyway. Yeah, anyway, so what I wanted to say is none of this stuff would have meant anything before the discovery of the timeline in the Psalms. Like, you know, you read this and you just go, okay, well, 2 years, whatever. What does that mean, right? But now with the discovery of the timeline, all of this makes sense. And so the dreams that they had at the, I don't really want to focus on the butler so much because he survived, but on the baker, at the end of the baker's dream, he says that, Joseph says that he's going to be hung on a pole and birds are going to come and eat his flesh, right? And do you remember this timeline? And we have the birds eating the flesh. So we've got Luke 17 that correlates with Ezekiel 39 verse 4. And then we have, it's like Luke 17 verse 37, I think, goes to Ezekiel 39 4. And then you have Matthew 24, I forget what exact verse, that goes to Revelation 19. So, and here again we have this birds eating flesh again. I thought that was really interesting. It's another way that God is tying all of this together. And so the main takeaway from this was the fact that, okay, so God uses, and we know this from Psalm 90 and 2 Peter chapter 3, we know that God uses numbers like days for years or days for thousands of years. So if he says 2 years, that could easily stand for 2 days or 2,000 years or whatever, right? And so that's what I'm like hyper aware of that now. So when I'm reading anything, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, I know it says 2 months or 2 days or two whatever. Is there something under the surface here? And with this, absolutely. And so what's really cool about this is a lot of the timelines, you know, we talked about, put my glasses on again. We talked about the timeline that the Jews understand. Do I have it here? I don't see it. Well, anyway, it sort of coordinates with this one, right? And then also they have they have their understanding of the 6,000 years from the first verse in the Bible. And of course, in the book of Isaiah, it tells us that God is the God who tells us the end from the beginning. And there it is, like in the first verse of the Bible, it tells you the whole layout of humankind as a timeline. It's too bad I don't have that graphic up here. Oh, there it is. That one.
Oh.
Okay. So, but see, this is laid out in 6,000 years. So where does 2 days or 2,000 years come in? See, they would never understand that, right? But it's because the marker isn't Adam. The marker is Jesus. That's what's so amazing about this. The marker has shifted, and now it's Jesus. So when you go to Hosea chapter 6, verse 2, which I think I might have. I'll go ahead and read that if I'm smart enough to put it in here. Okay. This is Hosea 6, 1 through 3. All this is important. Come, let us return to the Lord. Now, this is from Israel's perspective. He has torn us to pieces, but he will heal us. He has injured us, but he will bind up our wounds. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. Like face to face. Like literally live in his presence. It gets even better. Let us acknowledge the Lord. Let us press on to acknowledge him. As surely as the sun rises, he will appear. He will come to us like the winter rains, like the spring rains that water the earth. Did you catch that sun rises? Remember the what we talked about, the Hannah, that her father's name was Phinehel, and that means face of God. And then the other place that we hear that same name is when Jacob wrestled with the angel. He called that place Phinehel because he saw the face of God there. And so this connects back to the beginning of Tabernacles, where they will literally see the face of God, which ties it on the timeline to 2032, exactly 2,000 years since Jesus was crucified and resurrected, and that is according to the Essenes and their calendar. So 2 days, so the 2 days represents the 2,000 years. And what's so cool about Hosea 6 is it says, you know, it gives you two different deals there. It says in 2 days, and then it says on the third day. So it's literally splitting the timeline right there, right? And then this goes along perfectly with Genesis 40 and 41. And so it wasn't hard to put this timeline together that I've got. Oh, not that one. This one? The new one?
Yeah.
The only thing hard about it is, again, there's a lot of information to put on a very small piece of paper. So the patterns that were really neat in there are the birds eating flesh, the fact that Jesus is the time marker now instead of Adam. And in the Old Testament, you see a lot of this 2 days and 3 days, right? The 3 days, or on the third day, if you don't know that Jesus came at the 4,000th year, and it's been 2,000 years almost since then, right? So let's say that you're a Jew and you're in Judaism, you're not a Messianic Jew. None of this would make any sense. So when you read Hosea 6, it doesn't make any sense. But when you know that Jesus is the marker, all of a sudden it's like, wow, this thing comes alive, you know? And so in, let's see, what did I do to myself here? So here's I'm going to read this, and I'll probably have to edit all of this out. But so the butler and the baker, that they're really interesting in how they fit into this, and the fact that Joseph told them that in 3 days one was going to live and one was going to die. So you got 3 days there. But then when you get to Pharaoh's dream, it gets even better. So I'm going to read this from Genesis 41. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. So translated, at the end of 2,000 years. So not after 2,000 years, but at the end of 2,000 years. So where are we now? We are at the end of 2,000 years. Like the 3,000 will start, literally according to the Essenes and the timeline, it will start, what, 8 years from now? And if you have to take 7 years off of that for the tribulation, you see how all of this keeps showing this exact same timeline? It's just more proof, more evidence that the timeline is correct. I can't find anything that goes against it. So, to me, it just seems like, this is kind of a done deal. Anyway, I'm going to read this, because I keep interrupting myself, but I'm going to read this, and there is a verse in here that just drove me crazy when I saw it, in a good way. So then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamt a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind. There's something in there too. I haven't had a chance to really dig into that east wind, but that's not accidental. Something going on there with the east wind. Sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and, I forgot that word, indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dream. But there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants, and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. We each had a dream one night, he and I. Each of us dreamt according to the interpretation of his own dream. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. That's an interesting verse. I'm not really sure about that. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothes, and came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not of me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up of one stalk, full of good. Then behold, 7 heads withered, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. So there's 2 witnesses to the same event or events. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind, are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all of the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream, okay, get this, and the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, 2 witnesses, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So what does that mean? He gave us 2 witnesses in the Psalms that we can interpret. According to Joseph, when there's 2 witnesses, and we know this from the Torah also, and the New Testament, when there are 2 witnesses, it means that it's firmly established. In this case, it means that it's firmly established by God, and it will happen. So all of the time when I say, God's sovereign, and I'm still going to say this, God's sovereign, and he could take this and he could move it. But according to his word, once he shows you this twice, he's not going to do that. I'm just saying, that's God's word. So, when I saw that, I just can't stop thinking about that. That this is firmly established in God's eyes, and the fact that all of the timelines that have been discovered since the key basically was revealed, they all fit. Like, none of them are off. They're all right on. So anyway, I just think that's really amazing. So we talked about Hosea, that he mentions after 2 days he will revive us, and on the 3rd day he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. When has Israel or anyone lived in his presence? Like, if you take that literal, like, people will want to make that symbolic or something, but if you take that at face value, again, we have the face-to-face, we have the Hana, we have the Peniel, we have all of these interconnections that happen at 2032 based on Psalm 84, right? Based on Hana or Anna being 84 at the time when she saw the face of God. Like, all of these things just keep, connecting. And then we also have Malachi chapter 4, who uses the symbolism for Jesus' second coming, saying that the Son of Righteousness will arise, talking about the second coming. And here we have in Hosea chapter 6, talking about the exact same thing. It says, as surely as the sun rises. So God is interconnecting all of these scriptures with the same symbolism. In Malachi, in Hosea, going back to Genesis, where Jacob wrestled with the angel, and then as he was leaving the next morning, what does it say? Like, out of nowhere, for absolutely no reason, it says, and the sun rose over him. That's how God connects. That's why it's encrypted. It's only when you understand how God reveals things and how he connects all of this through keywords, phrases, numbers, patterns, then it starts to come alive and you can see it. But before that, when you're just reading the Bible, you don't pick up on any of that. You're just reading a story, right? So anyway, personally, I think all of that is pretty amazing. And how Adam has always kind of been the marker, and especially to the Jews. I mean, most Christians don't even think about this, the 6,000 years and all that. If you go back and you read some of the early church fathers from like the first... Hi. When you read some of the writings from the early church fathers, like shortly after John. So there was Polycarp and so I forget all their names because they all have crazy names, like Polycarp. That sounds like a Pokemon, doesn't it? Anyway, they understood. They understood the 6,000 years. A lot of them write about it. Even Paul's sidekick, Barnabas, in his epistle, which isn't in the Bible, right? But we know it's dated back to the 1st century, so we know that it's at least an early church father. He talks about it as well. So it was definitely understood back in the disciples' time. And then as the church sort of became more Catholic, I suppose, and pagan with Constantine and all that. And then also, even when you read a lot of Paul's writings, like the book of Galatians, for instance, he's basically saying, talking to the people of Galatia, I don't know, the Galatians within their city, like, who has bewitched you? Who's come along and tried to basically convert you back to Judaism, like saying that you've got to keep all the law and you've got to do all this stuff. So there was definitely a tension between the Jews, the religious Jews, and the early Christians. And so it kind of makes sense that the early Christians sort of divorced themselves from Judaism and just said, well, we're going to do our thing and you do your thing and we're not really going to mix that much. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense to me. But at the same time, we lost, I think, through all of that, even up through the Protestant, the Reformation, we didn't really get any of that back. Because if you're focused on the New Testament and the Gospels and maybe Paul's writings, you're not really getting the whole picture, right? And now what I think is so amazing is this is about the whole picture. Like the timeline doesn't just happen in the New Testament, right? The timeline happens throughout the Bible, and it's amazing how interconnected it all is and how God connected everything together. And I mean, I know a lot of people who study end-time prophecy have realized that Daniel 12 talks about how these things will be sealed up until the last days, and then it will be understood by people who are actually looking. And I think that's where we're at, and it's finally being understood. The problem is not a whole lot of people know about it.
Yeah, not a lot of people are looking for it.
Yeah. I mean, I listen to a lot of different teachers. As much as I can while I'm working, I'll just put on some random, thing, and a lot of them I'll just turn off because they're just like, they'll start with like, the end time timeline or something like that, and then they're just talking a bunch of nonsense that they're just basically guessing at stuff. And I hate to say it, but I get really irritated with that because they have no foundation to build on. They're just like trying to sort of logically guess at things and then talk like, oh yeah, this is the way it's going to be. No. But anyway, there are definitely people out there that are searching, but then they read this book and that book and end up with all kinds of crazy ideas that really aren't in the Bible. Some of it sounds logical, but I don't know.
If you read between the lines, it turns out that they're not.
Yeah, a lot of it's to sell books.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think a lot of it, because some of these guys, I mean, they've written like 50 books, right? That's what they do for a living, right? They write books. I think I'd go out of my mind if I did, especially if I wrote 50 books like that, 650 pages. But I don't know. God bless them. Before the timeline, I was struggling to figure all this out, which is kind of how all this got started. Trying to figure out where everything fits in. But the remarkable thing again is that now it all kind of fits and makes sense. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to really go over tonight. I was going to try to keep it a little shorter tonight, as far as what I have here, and then we can just talk and turn the camera off. So yeah, Jesus is the marker. which I'm not sure if... See, I think that's a really big deal. Because if you listen to the teachings that are coming from the Essene writings, okay, it can sound like we have until 2075, because that's actually the end of the age. So the end of the age that Jesus came in, right? Because remember, these are basically, where's the big timeline? Here we go. So those are all ages, right? The 2,000, each of those 2,000 years is an age, and you see the church age, right? So if you go to the Essene writings, you will realize that 75 AD was the end of the age of when Jesus came. And that makes sense because the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and then the Romans went after the rest of the Jews. Basically, it took them about till 75 AD to kind of do what they were doing, and that's when the system that was implemented in the law of sacrifice, right, disappeared. So without a temple, you can't do temple sacrifices. So the law, as they knew it, ended, and that's when the church age began. But the church age actually began at Shavuot, or Feast of Weeks, also known as Pentecost, 10 days after Jesus ascended, right? And he sent down the Holy Spirit. So Acts chapter 2 is when the church age began. So there's kind of an overlap. The church age began in 32 AD. The age ended in 75 AD. So if you add 2,000 years to 75 AD, you come up to 2075, right? We're not going to make it to 2075, I can tell you that. But so what this says, what this means, is the marker is no longer those dates. The marker is Jesus. 2,000 years or 2 days. And we know from Hosea 6, because he talks about at the end of the 2 days, right, and then at the beginning of the 3 days. So that literally you can plot that on a timeline. You've got the end of one age and now the beginning of the next one, and you got a line in between them, which is literally a day.
Which is 1,000 years.
Yeah. So I mean, it makes it all like it's kind of like neon signs now pointing, like it's right here, ding dong, right? It's right here. Like, open your eyes and see it. So anyway, that's what I got tonight, because I'm really excited about this timeline. And there's nothing in this timeline that really is confusing. I could add more to it, but and then you get to the part where the reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. If you apply that to today, and the 2 timelines that he put in the Psalms, literally thousands of years ago, they're just hidden in there all this time, I think he's telling us something. And the fact that I wasn't really studying this until Pastor Pete went, I wonder why God's pointed out, that it was 2 years later.
And then he just stopped and went on?
Yeah, he just pondered it for a second. He said that, and then he just went on, with his teaching.
And that's probably God using him to tell you.
I totally think so.
Look at that.
And again, I always say I'm a nobody, but God uses nobodies, But I totally, when I heard that, it was just like, bing, 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 So, anyway, I don't know. I'm still going to try to figure out how to do shorter videos for YouTube.
You want to shut that off?
Yeah. Go ahead and shut it off, Devin.
Just by pressing the same button.